One major development going on now involves more to do with Rachel Zegler and her attitude towards South Park Studios and Paramount after learning about what they are planning for their upcoming special called the DEI Special.
When South Park turned its spotlight on Rachel Zegler, the rising star of Disney's doomed Snow White remake, no one expected it would spark a $100 million legal firestorm. But that's exactly what happened. This cartoon jab became a clash over free speech, reputation, and the power of parody in the age of cancel culture.
And what they recently did toward both Zegler and the Disney company for their Snow White film. It turns out that both Trey Parker and Matt Stone are already preparing for the DEI special.
Rachel Zegler was publicly humiliated and determined to fight back. On the other side, there's Trey Parker and Matt Stone, comedy legends who built an empire mocking everything sacred.
The last time I had the dream, I was walking down the school hallway, and that's when I started to notice that something's wrong. Everyone I cared about has been systematically replaced. And finally, I want to scream, and I'm like, why are they replacing every single character with someone who is diverse?
No, make it more lame. That is exactly what they're doing. And that is why we hate the diversity, equity, and inclusion casting and writing in movies.
And then we have Disney, silent but watching, with billions on the line. This tension has been brewing for some time. Rachel Zegler's casting as Snow White was supposed to signal Disney's bold, modern direction of a classic tale. But almost immediately, the announcement ignited controversy.
Snow White is the first American feature-length animated movie. 1937. It's one of the most beloved movies of all time. Even if everything worked perfectly, it would have been almost impossible for this movie to succeed, because you're comparing it to one of the most beloved films of all time and a truly groundbreaking movie.
Fans responded with skepticism over how the project was being pitched. A fierce leader, no prince, no true love, and no singing dwarfs.
It's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White.
That laugh.
That is
not going to be
yeah.
saved by
You
the
wrote
prince.
it?
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be.
The timeless magic of 1937's original was being broken, and critics weren't buying it.
No, the people who you need to entertain, the people who you need to serve, the people who pay your salary.
I'm sorry that the Snow White movie sucked, guys. I'm sorry. I'm not sorry at all that we forced, basically as a company, Daily Wire forced Snow White into production again. It was supposed to come out like a year and a half ago, and then we went after them so hard because of their variety of ridiculous sins that they actually went into full-scale reshoots on Snow White when we announced that we had a competitor.
Rachel took every opportunity to defend the film's vision, but her comments did more harm than good. At red carpets and press events, she mocked the original story as weird and stalkerish.
The original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story. With a guy who literally stalks her.
Say it louder so your other eye can hear you.
Criticized the prince for lacking consent and proudly declared that this Snow White wouldn't be dreaming about love. It was a sharp break from the Disney fantasy millions grew up with. Instead of connecting with fans, her words came off as dismissive and hostile. Fans accused her of attacking the very character she was hired to embody.
It was the first animated film that had the kind of Disney magic that had depth, that had absolute it was riveting, and it's based, of course, on a Brothers Grimm story, and people loved that film. And this started with the movie star Rachel Zegler, who I believe would be categorized as a loudmouth dope.
Behind the scenes, Disney scrambled to control the backlash. Rumors swirled that executives were concerned about the film's direction and Zegler's public image. The stakes were enormous when dealing with a legacy film, a huge budget, and a new face under fire. Reshoots were quietly ordered, and there was talk of privately changing the campaign entirely. What should have been a nostalgic celebration became a symbol of Hollywood's growing crisis. Then comes South Park. For over 25 years, Trey Parker and Matt Stone have carved their legacy through the adult cartoon South Park. No celebrity or storyline has been safe, so when Rachel Zegler's Snow White drama started dominating headlines, it was only a matter of time before Parker and Stone turned toward the chaos. News broke that South Park was preparing a DEI special, a send-up of diversity, equity, and inclusion in modern entertainment. And while the creators kept the details quiet, insiders quickly connected the dots. This was a full-blown parody aimed at Hollywood's obsession with identity politics. politics, and at the center of it all was Rachel Zegler's case. By the time trailers and leaks began surfacing, fans were already buzzing. The animation featured a not-so-subtle stand-in for Zegler, a modern princess shouting slogans about progress and representation while rewriting fairy tales in real time. Her kingdom was a nightmare where every classic character had been swapped out for more inclusive replacements. The satire was hilariously brutal, poking fun at everything of the corporate system, and it didn't stop there. The characters sang ballads, mocking reboots, dropped lines that mirrored Zegler's real interviews, and belittled peasants for failing to get with the times. Audiences roared. For many, it was a long overdue pushback against what they saw as Hollywood's tone-deaf approach. But while viewers were hitting replay, one person in Los Angeles was fuming and had a lawyer on speed dial. Rachel Zegler was quietly preparing for revenge. Behind closed doors, her team was calculating how hard to hit back. Because to them, this wasn't just a parody, it was a character assassination. What followed was one of the boldest legal moves Hollywood had seen in years. A $100 million defamation lawsuit filed against Trey Parker, Matt Stone, and the studios behind South Park. The complaint accused the show of malicious misrepresentation, of portraying Rachel as an arrogant diva who single-handedly tanked a multi-million-dollar Disney film. The lawsuit cited scenes of the Zegler character demanding luxury perks, rewriting scripts for political messaging, and sneering at audiences for being too traditional to evolve. In Rachel's view, this wasn't satire anymore, it was sabotage. Industry insiders were stunned. While celebrities have grumbled about South Park before, very few have dared to go this far. Lawsuits against the show typically came from groups or institutions, not individual actors at the peak of their careers. Many assumed this was just a PR move, but Rachel's legal team was serious and they moved fast. Within days, major outlets were plastering headlines across the internet. Some treated it like a joke. Others saw it as the beginning of a cultural showdown between modern celebrity image control and old-school comedy. Suddenly, what started as a 22-minute cartoon was now a nationwide story. Rachel's team argued that the parody cost her real opportunities, roles rescinded, meetings canceled, and brands distancing themselves from controversy. To them, this wasn't just a punchline, it was professional damage, and they wanted accountability. Meanwhile, Parker and Stone stayed unusually quiet. No jokes, no jabs. But that silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. As the lawsuit gained traction, the effects spread far beyond Rachel Zegler and South Park. And somewhere in the background, Disney, the very studio that launched the drama in the first place, was watching everything unfold with growing unease. Although Disney wasn't named in the suit, insiders claimed the studio's legal team began monitoring the case almost immediately, not out of sympathy, but out of self-preservation. If the trial moved forward, it could force internal production records into the spotlight like emails, budgets, and casting notes. And with Snow White already branded as a PR disaster, the last thing Disney wanted was a courtroom revealing more info. Meanwhile, other studios took note. If South Park could be sued for parodying public figures, who would be next? Would satire now require disclaimers? Lawyers were flooded with questions, and the truth became clear that Rachel's lawsuit had created an anxious moment, one that made executives, comedians, and creators all a little more nervous. The public, however, was split. Some praised Rachel's courage, framing her as a young woman standing up to the men who had turned her into a punchline. Others rolled their eyes, accusing her of being overly sensitive and unable to take a joke. And yet, the two men at the center of it all, Trey Parker and Matt Stone, remained curiously low. No statements, no interviews, just silence. The kind that doesn't come from fear, but from preparation. Because while the world debated, they were already assembling their defense and plotting their next move with the strategy of veterans who'd been through this chaos before. For two guys who built their empire mocking chaos, Trey Parker and Matt Stone were suddenly in the middle of it. But instead of clapping back with another skit or doubling down on the jokes, they did something unexpected. They went completely quiet. No press junkets, just silence. And for anyone familiar with their history, that silence wasn't surrender, it was the sound of preparation. Inside their Culver City headquarters, the mood was anything but calm. Writers and producers described an atmosphere part war room, part comedy club. Phones buzzed with media alerts, inboxes flooded with interview requests. And still, Parker and Stone said nothing publicly. Privately, though, they were working. Sketches were drafted, concepts created, jokes written. Their impulse to turn the lawsuit into an episode was strong, but legal advisors urged caution. Anything aired too soon could be seen as retaliation, possibly influencing the court's view of ongoing harm, so they waited. And in that waiting, the ideas piled up. They were scripting their defense the only way they knew how, through satire. But for now, it all stayed locked in the vault. Still, the pressure was building, not from the court, but from within. Parker and Stone weren't used to playing defense. They had weathered lawsuits before, from religious groups, corporations, even politicians. But this was different. Rachel Zegler was a single actor who was young, public-facing, and already bruised by the press. That made the method trickier. This wasn't just about free speech anymore, it was about who the public would sympathize with. Their restraint may have surprised fans, but insiders say it was strategic. The longer they held back, the more they appeared thoughtful and even responsible. It gave them room to frame the lawsuit, not as a personal feud, but as a threat to creative freedom. And when they finally broke the silence, they made sure every word counted. While the public traded memes and hot takes, another power player was sweating behind the scenes. And it wasn't Rachel or the South Park duo. It was Disney. The entertainment giant hadn't been named in the lawsuit, but its fingerprints were all over this mess. Snow White was their property. Rachel was their lead. And now a legal storm was circling dangerously close to their system. Insiders whispered that Disney's legal department kicked into high gear the moment court documents mentioned potential damages tied to production choices. Why? Because if Parker and Stone's defense leaned on publicly reported facts, they might try to prove the parody wasn't just outrageous, it was grounded in real studio chaos. That meant emails, production budgets, test screening notes, internal memos were all potentially up for grabs in court. Having private communications subpoenaed and dissected in open court was the worst case possible. It wasn't just about embarrassment, it was about exposure. If a courtroom pulled back the curtain on how Disney managed the Snow White remake, especially decisions about casting, messaging, and marketing, it could open them up to shareholder hits and PR disasters far beyond this case. So, while Rachel's legal team built its narrative and South Park's creators plotted their counterattack, Disney stayed frozen in the middle, trying to stay invisible, but that was becoming impossible. Rumors spread that the studio was preparing its own legal motions, preemptive strikes to block intruders and keep internal files buried. They hadn't signed up to be part of a free speech battle, but the deeper the case went, the more likely they'd get dragged in. And then came the whispers. Some claimed Disney executives privately agreed that the film was in trouble, that messaging had muddied the magic, that Zegler's interviews had hurt audience goodwill. Whether true or not, the idea alone was explosive. If those sentiments ever surfaced in court, they'd undercut Rachel's claims and spark an entirely new one. With all eyes on the courtroom, Disney's strategy was clear. Stay out of headlines, avoid testimony, and pray this blows over. Behind the curtain of caution, Trey Parker and Matt Stone weren't just waiting, they were preparing. Their defense would be layered, strategic, and, of course, laced with satire waiting to be unleashed. But they knew the stakes. This wasn't just about clearing their names. It was about defending a legacy built on pushing boundaries. And if they lost, it wouldn't just cost them money, it could change the rules of comedy forever. Their legal team focused on the foundation of American satire. Parody is protected speech. The challenge is proving that no reasonable viewer could mistake a cartoon for a legitimate takedown. On paper, the argument was solid. South Park had lampooned popes, presidents, tech billionaires, and even entire religions. Never had a court found their jokes to be anything but jokes. But this case was different. It wasn't abstract or political. It was personal. It had a face, a name, and a tearful interview to back it up. Still, Parker and Stone leaned into their strengths. If they were going to defend themselves, they'd do it with the same irreverence that got them here. Ideas flew around the writer's room. A fake trial where animated versions of themselves testified under oath. A musical lament sung by cartoon lawyers. Even a sketch titled Defamation Nation, where the town sues each other over minor slights until speech is banned entirely. But every punchline had to be weighed against potential consequences. Lawyers reviewed drafts with red pens, crossing out anything that could be interpreted as mocking Rachel directly while the case was ongoing. The goal was clear: stay funny, but stay safe. The line between satire and slander had never been thinner, and yet Parker and Stone weren't backing down. When they finally broke their public silence, they did it with precision. A brief, two-sentence statement. We believe strongly in the right to parody public figures and public events. We look forward to a vigorous defense of that right. No jokes, just intent. It wasn't the loudest response, but it said everything. They were ready for court, and they weren't about to apologize for doing what they'd always done. By the time the trial date arrived, the courthouse had morphed into something closer to a movie premiere. Cameras lined the steps, protesters, supporters, and influencers. Inside, the mood was heavy. This wasn't just about a cartoon. It was a fight over what could be joked about in the 21st century, and who, if anyone, was off limits. Parker and Stone showed up in understated suits, flanked by their legal team, looking more like accountants than the creative minds behind one of television's most outrageous shows. But the mischief was still there. Matt's tie was patterned with tiny paper cutout figures. Trey wore cufflinks shaped like miniature TVs, subtle reminders of where they came from. Rachel Zegler arrived, separately, serious, and composed, her expression unreadable. Her legal team had shaped a narrative centered on emotional and financial harm. They argued that the episode blurred the line between satire and slander. Their star witness was Rachel herself. On the stand, she described watching the episode alone and the sting of realizing millions were laughing at a version of her that felt uncomfortably close to reality. She spoke of canceled auditions, public scorn, and a growing fear that she'd been branded difficult long before she'd had the chance to prove herself. The defense countered with a different tone. They presented South Park as an institution of absurdist comedy, where talking towels and celebrity clones coexisted with news parody. They argued no reasonable viewer would take any of it seriously. The episode, they said, was clearly exaggerated to the point of idiocy. Its very ridiculousness was the defense. Expert witnesses debated public perception and shared their viewpoints. Psychologists weighed in on audience interpretation. Media analysts dissected meme culture. It was less a legal proceeding and more a modern culture scheme. The judge, clearly aware of the tone this case could set, refused to issue a quick dismissal. Instead, the fate of parody would be handed to a jury. 12 citizens tasked with deciding if a cartoon had gone too far, or if a celebrity had simply stepped into a position she wasn't ready for. And as deliberations began, both camps braced for a verdict that could leave effects far past the courtroom walls. After 10 days of deliberation, speculation reached a peak. News fans idled around the courthouse. Social media teemed with last-minute predictions. Would the jury side with a rising star whose career may have been undercut, or with two legacy creators defending the meaning of satire? When the decision finally dropped, it landed with the weight of a cultural gavel. Parker and Stone were not liable. The jury acknowledged Rachel's distress, but concluded that the show's tone, style, and legacy of absurdism made it unreasonable for any viewer to interpret the episode as factual. In the eyes of the law, the parody was victorious. Outside the courtroom, reactions exploded in real time. Free speech advocates celebrated the verdict as a win for artistic liberty, a huge relief for creators everywhere, one entertainment lawyer posted. Meanwhile, Rachel's supporters voiced disappointment but doubled down on the emotional argument. Just because it's legal doesn't mean it's right, read one trending tweet. Rachel emerged with her dignity intact, delivering a brief statement that struck a careful balance. She thanked her supporters, reaffirmed her belief in respectful, neat storytelling, and made it clear this battle wasn't just about her, it was about drawing a line in an industry that tries its best to blur them. No tears, no dramatics, just quiet response. For Parker and Stone, the response was just as measured. "We're going back to work," Trey said with a half smirk, surrounded by attorneys and a wall of reporters. No celebration, just a return to the writer's room, where satire is always waiting to be created. But the impact didn't end there. Industry insiders predicted a chilling effect. Some studios quietly reviewed their legal playbooks. Others saw the ruling as permission to go further, take bigger swings, push boundaries harder. A new line had been drawn, and everyone wanted to know how close they could get without crossing it. In a business that runs on image, influence, and interpretation, the verdict didn't settle the debate, it expanded it. In the end, it wasn't just about a cartoon or a lawsuit, it was about the ultra-thin line between comedy and cruelty. Rachel Zegler may have lost the case, but she sparked a conversation few in Hollywood dared to look into, and Parker and Stone walked away legally untouchable. Their win reaffirmed the power within comedy, but reminded everyone that even satire can be a risky business. In an age where every joke is dissected and every person is victimized, the fight over who controls the narrative is far from over. And whether it plays out in a courtroom, a comment section, or the next viral episode, everyone's watching.